October 13th, 1906. I took the job. I'm leaving school. I feel as if something inside me has broken. A cord attaching to me a familiar world. I don't know what's the right thing. So many of our neighborhood girls forego school to earn money for their families. I hear the Feldman sisters tromping up the stairs and creaking in bed all hours of the night. And I have always felt secretly grateful I wasn't in their position. I know I have always been held in special esteem by our neighbors, the way Marm has been able to keep me in school. They all thought I would go far, and now I don't know what they'll think. I must do my best with this job, learn all I can, and make something of myself. Maybe I could one day be like Florence Nightingale, a heroic nurse healing the wounded, but she was born into an upper-class English family, and they could afford to attend the best schools. A future in science seems like such an impossible dream, involving faraway, expensive schools that certainly would not accept a lower-class American Jewish girl. The meeting at Mrs. Browning's has shown me the shabbiness in my own life. I got that feeling the moment her maid brought us into her parlor. I have never been in such an extravagant home. Hanging from the walls were tiger and lion heads, teeth bars, eyes glaring. Between two elephant tusks hung photographs of Mr. Browning with a large group of hunters on a safari in Africa. Another large photo showed Mrs. Browning being hefted in a conveyance by several men, along peacock feathers decorating her hat. Marm sat at the edge of the finely upholstered chair, and I slipped on to the hard surface of a carved wooden bench. Crystal lamps shimmered on the side tables, lace curtains covered the windows. My teacher's home seemed so perfectly to follow the rules of the decorative furnishings we studied in Ladies' Home Journal, even down to the obese Persian cat that lay on the oriental carpet, swishing its tail and watching us with his careful eyes. Marm played with her purse, popping it and snapping it. I sat with my hat in hand, and I stared at the painting of Mary and Jesus on the far wall. I felt Mrs. Browning had us wait those several moments in order to fully absorb her providence. Now, providence is one of your vocabulary words. What you're going to need to do is look at what you guessed that the word meant, see if it matches, if it could actually be used in a meaning here, and if it doesn't seem right, why don't you please look it up and then put in the correct definition for providence and then see how it fits in this sentence. Finally, she came in, followed by her butler with tea. How strange it felt to be served by a real butler. He poured and left us, and Mrs. Browning chattered with Marm for a few minutes about what a good student I am, always attentive, and so on. Marm looked so out of place. Her usually rosy cheeks were the color of waxed beans, and her mouth curved downward. She was unhappy with me for wanting to leave school. She was not comfortable in this woman's house, forced into a position of having to barter for me. It made me angry to read all of this in her face. It's very lovely to speak with you, Mrs. Galuski, but you must remind me of what brought your visit, Mrs. Browning said. Marm cleared her throat and said, it seems that Prudence has managed to find a sort of job. She would be working at the New York City Department of Health and Sanitation, assisting a sanitary engineer. My bright teacher turned towards me, nose wrinkled, her perfectly plucked brows furrowed. She said, a sanitary engineer? Why would you want to assist such a person, Prudence? The question felt like a pin through my stomach. She had rarely spoken directly to me before, except to tell me how pretty I'd be if only I could put my hair in curls and wore a ribbon in my collar. Mrs. Browning, I said, I've been working at as Marm's assistant through the whole summer. I glanced at Marm, thinking of her argument about Mr. Soper choosing me. I pushed on. I thought my mother was satisfied with me as an assistant, even though I'm only a 16-year-old and a girl. A blush spread on Marm's cheeks, anger and embarrassment at me bringing our private argument out about my interviewer to the public. I pushed myself to continue to fight for this job. Mrs. Browning, I feel inside of me. I need to expand my knowledge to learn more about how the human body functions, and I think this job assisting the head epidemiologist would help me do just that. Another vocabulary word, epidemiologist. Use the same process. See if it fits. And I actually think, oh, that's the second time we've seen that word, so you should know what that one is. Sorry. Mrs. Browning's eyes pressed into me like little thumbs, and she said, I'm surprised at your choice for your life, Prudence. I thought after graduation that you would seek work as a secretary and not muck around in human filth. A girl with your skill could acquire respectable employment at one of the finer banks in the city. You could work up to private secretary for the bank manager, or perhaps keep books at one of the fashion houses, even governess for royalty. Proper work, she said, for which we've prepared you. The thought of being in one of those jobs, counting other people's money or watching their babies all day, nearly choked me. I looked at Marm, then back at my teacher, who nodded at me to speak. I have learned a great deal at your school, Mrs. Browning, I said. Her expectant eyes didn't leave me, so I went on. The work for Mr. Soper would challenge me. Mrs. Browning asked me what exactly I meant by that. I will not simply be a witness to death, I said. And working with Mr. Soper to find the source of disease, I will be helping to stop its spread, and I feel that is an important job. The tips of her nostrils flared. And why does this man want your help? A young girl like you. Can't he find a budding science fellow to do the work? I felt my eyes open like tea saucers. I wanted to shout, I am a budding scientist. He saw that in me. Why can't you see the same? But she didn't see me as anything more than a girl, and that was the problem. It had always been the problem. I held in that fury I held in the fury that twisted around my heart like a rope. Instead, I quietly replied, he hired me as a typist and a note-taker. It was only afterwards that he called me an assistant. An awfully wry smile spread over Mrs. Browning's face. Beyond typing, what exactly are your tasks? She asked. I don't know. Mr. Soper will teach me when I begin, I said. For example, will you cure the disease? She smiled and tilted her head. I didn't like the implications one bit. I repeated slowly, I will help stop the spread, ma'am. That gave her pause. She sipped her tea and nibbled a ladyfinger, and I felt the relief as her wide, gray stare removed from me, only to turn and to catch Marm. The dull, unhappy look in her eyes changed to a curious sort of pride. And so what's the problem? Mrs. Browning asked. You know that you can work at any job you like. He expects me to be there 8 a.m, I told her. Ah, she said. She sniffed her tea and put it down and wiped her fingertips on a satin napkin. You know the rules, she said. Marm spoke up, surprising me. Mrs. Browning, she said, can't you consider giving Prudence credit for doing such a worthy job? Surely you could overlook the rules this one time and allow her to make up the lessons nights and weekends. My eyes stung salty when I felt Marm at my side once again. I told Mrs. Browning I'd do any work she asked. Jealousy is a large commodity at our school, you know, that Prudence. Rules are created to keep order, Mrs. Browning said. The girls would not think their education was important if I let you work instead of attending school. Let's not tell the other girls, I suggested. Miss Prudence Galuski, she said, if you can no longer appreciate the standards of our institution, perhaps I can find another needy girl on whom I can bestow the donated funds that you currently enjoy. I never saw my missus so frosty before. Do you not own the school, Mrs. Browning? Marm broke in. Can you not consider for one moment the rare situation that my daughter is in? For once, a man in high position has recognized a girl's talent and is willing to give her a chance to use it. I don't understand why you won't help Prudence, why you can't see the opportunity being offered to her. I'm afraid you do not see what is before you, Mrs. Browning huffed. The opposite sex stands ready to take advantage of your daughter, and you are ushering her straight into such difficulty. I beg your pardon, Marm exclaimed, jumping out of her chair. Prudence is the most important person in the world to me, and if I thought that she would come to harm in any way, I would not let her work in that office. But I am proud of my daughter and her intelligence and bravery, and I am sorry that you don't feel the same way. Good night to you, ma'am." She took my wrist, and we walked out, and it was all so horrible. And now I don't go to school anymore. I hope I have made the right decision.